We are live.
Good morning and welcome to this Canmore Local Assessment Review Board hearing. We are here today to review the complaint and subsequent evidence as filed for tax roll number 15358. Municipal address is Unit 18, 100 Prospect Heights. I will start by introducing the panel and then asking the parties to introduce themselves. After that, I will explain our standard hearing procedure and ask for comments in that regard. My name is Martin Buckley, and I am the chair appointed to this panel. The other panel members with me today are Karen Mara and Dale Hildebrandt. Does anybody present have any objection to this panel as constituted? Mr. Wayloggy?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I am now going to have the parties introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Wayloggy. The complainant has chosen not to be present at the hearing. Would you please state for the name, your record, organization, and your role in the hearing? And
Sure. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the board. My name is Lance Wayloggy. Can you hear me okay?
yes,
Yeah, perfect. I'm with Benchmark Assessment Consultants. I'm the appointed assessor for the town of Canmore, and I will be the respondent here today.
thank you. Ms. Shepherd, you spoke to the complainant. Can you tell us, the panel, about your discussions with him?
Yes, when I spoke with the complainant this morning, he advised that he would not attend the meeting over Zoom and that his written submission was what he would be providing today.
Thank you. So on to the procedures. The Local Assessments Review Board standard practice is to have the complainant present all of their evidence first, followed by questions from the respondent and the panel. Obviously, we won't be doing the questioning. Next, the respondent presents their evidence, followed once again by questions from the complainant and then the panel. The complainant has an opportunity for rebuttal, which appears to be foregone. And finally, both parties will have an opportunity to present their final argument and summarize their evidence. Panel. If anyone needs a break or if a problem comes up, please let the panel know as soon as possible and we can address those things as we go. Are there any questions regarding the procedure today, or is everyone satisfied?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other preliminary issues for the panel to address? Ms. Mara? No. Mr. Hildebrandt?
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I see that both parties have exchanged disclosure evidence before the hearing. To save time, I propose that we mark all documents for the record now. This won't stop anyone from raising questions about admissibility later. If there are any such questions arise, we can still deal with them and strike material from the net record later if necessary. Is everyone comfortable with this procedure?
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
All right. So the first document I have is the complaint form and the brief summary that was provided by Mr. Body, the complainant. It's totals 3 pages, I believe. I would suggest we label that C1. And then there was the complainant's disclosure of evidence, a 2-page document that he submitted. That would be C2. And then the respondent's exhibits, Mr. Wayloggy provided a 70-page submission. It was received. That would be exhibit R1. And that is what I have for exhibits. Is that the same for everybody else?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what to say about Mr. Body's evidence. We've got it, we've reviewed it extensively. So I presume we move on to respondent, Mr. Wayloggy. If you'd like to speak, Mr. Wayloggy, on your evidence.
Oh, yes, please. Thank you. Again, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the panel. I'd like to just take a few minutes to introduce myself. I think this is the first time I've presented in front of you individuals. My name is Lance Wayloggy. I am an accredited municipal assessor of Alberta. I've been an assessor for 16 years. I've prepared assessments in various municipalities, including the city of Lethbridge, obviously the town of Canmore, the county of 40 Mile, village of Foremost, Bow Island, Redcliffe, Tabor, Nanton. And I've prepared assessments for a wide range of properties, including all of the assessment classes. Just before I get started, I just want to give you a kind of a rough outline of my presentation. I do want to address a few things in the complainant's submission, just verbally, quick response there. But I tend to jump around in my presentation a little bit. So I will be referencing page numbers, paragraph numbers, and try to hit the main points of my presentation as I go through. If there's anything that comes up with respect to clarification, just feel that to jump in and quickly ask me to repeat myself or otherwise. I know how frustrating it is to wait to the end of a presentation when something can kind of be cleared up early on. So feel free to jump in as you see fit. With that, Mr. Chairman, just a few things with respect to responding to the complainant's disclosure. He had made a few points, so just wanted to give you a little bit of background. We did have some early discussions in February and March around the assessment. There was some exchange of information and some questioning and some response. I think that I think there was maybe a little bit of a miscommunication. You'll see in his presentation, he had referenced some things that were going down or some things were going up with respect to the assessments. So I just wanted to clarify to the board that certainly I don't like using words like up or down because obviously assessments aren't prepared on previous year's assessments. But I will say the assessments within the condominium complex are all higher than they were last year. So I think that he had mentioned in his disclosure that some assessments were down, some assessments were up. That's not true. All assessments are higher than the previous year. You'll see in my presentation specifically speak on it, but the time adjustments, the adjustments that were applied to the sale prices of the comparables that I disclosed to him, they were all increased. They were all higher than the sale price, just indicating that, of course, the market was increasing over the analysis period, and they were all higher than the sale price. So what his real concern, and I'll get to it in my presentation, is really why his time adjusted sale price was essentially lower than his assessment, while the other three were higher than their assessment. So I'll actually wait until my presentation to specifically speak on that, but just keep that in mind as I kind of go through. But that's really the basis of his assertion here today. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, if I could just get you to turn to my page 3. Sorry, my page 5, under the issues. The issue here today is essentially market value. So with market value, the standard of review for this board is typically reasonableness. So the issue that the board has to answer here today is the assessed value of $923,000 reasonable, or is an alternative value as proposed by the complainant, and that value is $782,000, is that a more reasonable number? So I think the issues here are very, very straightforward. We're dealing with a market value issue, and it really just comes down, is the assessment more reasonable at $923,000, or is the alternate value as proposed by the complainant at $782,000 more reasonable? And that's really what we're trying to answer here today. And with that, if I could get the board to turn to my page 6, I want to give a little bit of background to the preparation of residential assessments, residential condominium assessments, and specifically. So overall, for the 2020 tax year, 2019 assessment year, the preparation of assessments for residential condominiums, and the subject is part of what's called a Bearland condominium project. The preparation of these assessments is to use 3 years of sales data prior to the valuation date. So for the 2020 tax year, the valuation date is July 1st of 2019. So the assessor would seek out the sales data of similar properties between July 1st, 2016 and June 30th of 2019. Anytime you use sales data over a length of period that encompasses 3 years, you're looking at a market which will obviously change. And in the town of Canmore, when you look at the market in July of 2016 versus the market closer to the valuation date of July 2019, you're talking about a very different market. Overall, the market has increased over that time period, meaning the same or similar houses obviously will sell for more at the end of that period versus the start of that period. And one of the things that the assessor is required to do prior to the preparation or analysis of his assessment models is to apply adjustments for market conditions. And so we commonly call this in the industry time adjustments. So if you have a property selling July of 2016 and the market has substantially increased since that time to the valuation date, the assessor would apply the time adjustments to each sale in that period to essentially bring those sale prices up to the valuation date. And so that's the first step in preparing the valuation models, is to apply these, we'll analyze and apply these time adjustments to the residential condominiums. And because different property types will increase at different rates, it's important to note that residential condominiums were analyzed separately than, say, single-family dwellings or vacant residential land or industrial property, retail property. Because they tend to do different things, we isolate them to themselves and analyze them with the intent to apply these adjustments just to the residential condominiums. And so what you're seeing on my page 7 is you're seeing essentially the results of what we call the time adjustments. So our analysis showed, training analysis using the sales to assessment ratio analysis, which trends the ratios of the sale prices versus the previous year's assessments. Over this period, you're looking at a significant increase in the 3-year period. And so what you're seeing here on the graph on page 7 is essentially that median SAR, or sales to assessment ratio, over that 3-year period to give you an indication of the strength of the market over the 3 years in the town of Canmore, and ultimately what the sale prices had to be adjusted over that period. On the next page, it is important to note that 984 residential condominiums were included in that analysis. So it was a significant amount of property sales that went into the development of these time adjustment factors. On page 8, you'll see essentially the result of that analysis. So for example, if you had a property selling in July of 2016, and you scan to the very, very far right of that graph or that chart there, you'll see that the assessor would apply essentially a factor of 1.1828 to that sale price to bring that up to July 1st, 2019 market conditions. So that just shows you the extent of the market over the time period for residential condominiums. So that's just a little bit of background. So after the assessor would adjust all of the sales accordingly, he would stratify properties. So for example, the subject's condominium complex, because residential condominium complexes are unique with respect to year builds, the location, factors that are influencing it, such as the subject property, some of the units back onto the river, some of the units back onto Three Sisters Drive. Different complexes have specific amenities, replacement schedules, reserve funds. So it's what the assessor would typically do is he would stratify condominium complexes unto themselves and essentially use the sales within those condominium complexes to develop the valuation model. So in short, the assessor would use the sales specifically within those complexes to develop the assessment model, rather than going out to other less comparable complexes to grab sales data. So for the subjects complex, valuation model was developed this year. There were 4 sales indicators in the complex. It's not a very large complex. I believe there's only 20 let's see, 23 residential condominiums within the complex itself. So over the 3-year period, there were 4 sales that were used to develop the valuation model within the complex itself. On my paragraph 5.4, so that's the top of page 10, you will see the 4 sales there. So that would be unit 2, civic address 2, 9, 12, and 18. These are the units that sold over the 3-year period. You'll notice that 2 of the 4 units sold relatively close to valuation date. So unit number 2 sold June of 2019. Unit 12 sold February of 2019. So we did have some indicators close to the valuation model, which is always nice. So the next step, obviously, the assessor would go ahead and apply the adjustment factors for market conditions, the time adjustments. So you'll see in the middle of the page, that second chart there, you'll see that the sale price of each unit. So number 2 sold for $1,140,800. It sold very close to the valuation date, so very little adjustment needed. But you'll see the factor there being applied, and then ultimately you'll have the time adjusted sale price. And of course, all these time adjusted sale prices reflect what the property would have sold for on the valuation date, July 1st, 2019. So we do that for each sales indicator. So number 9 sold June 2017 for $1,305,000. We apply the time adjustment factor to arrive at the resulting sale price there, the time adjusted sale price of $1,445,000. We do that for the remaining 2 to get our remaining time adjusted sale prices there. So now that we have our time adjusted sale prices, what I'm going to do to essentially show or demonstrate to the board that the assessments that the assessment of the subject property at 923 is reasonable. So typically with residential condominiums, especially the apartment style residential condominiums, we can usually break it down because the properties are so homogeneous. We can break it down on an analysis basis to a price per square foot. And it's very, very simple, very, very easy to understand. But when you have properties that are, not so homogeneous, similar, but still different, as I mentioned in this complex, you have a line of properties that back onto the Bow River, and they are influenced by, in a positive way, by that location, even though they're very close to the units that are backing onto Three Sisters Drive, which are essentially negatively affected by the traffic. So even though you have similar units, it does result in a range of values there just because of their specific location within the Bearland condominium itself. So because we do have a bit of a range here, we typically won't do a price per square foot analysis to essentially demonstrate or show the board the assessed value is reasonable. Alternatively, what we would do is we would adjust each sale price for the difference in their value impacting characteristics. And I mention it, just kind of scrolling back a little bit, I mentioned it on my paragraph 5.3. The simplest, the easiest way to understand and the most effective way to understand or to do this is to essentially use the difference in assessed values of each unit. And so if I can demonstrate to the board that the valuation model used to value these residential condominium units are accurate, are within a reasonable range of value, and are good estimates by way of the assessment to sales ratios. So scrolling back on 5.5, if we take a look at our valuation model and the assessments that produced for the specific sales indicators in the complex, you'll see that the time adjusted sale price in comparison to the assessments are very close. So for example, unit 2, the time adjusted sale price at 1.144 million has an assessment using the model at 1,000,056. So that would produce an assessment sales ratio of 0.92. Unit number 9, a ratio of 0.89. Unit 12, 0.89. And of course, the subject's property, unit number 18 at 1.1. So the valuation model, it's obviously not going to produce exact results because it is mass appraisal. And of course, we're looking at mass trends, and we're looking at creating a valuation model which is reflective of the middle of the sales range indicators. But what I'm trying to demonstrate, Mr. Chairman, is that the assessment model is fairly accurate. It's producing results that are within reasonable ranges of the sales indicators as adjusted through the time, the market condition adjustment, such that we can rely on the assessment model and the differences it produces for the value impacting characteristics to apply these differences to the time adjusted sale prices to give the board a narrow or an indicated value range of the subject property. So what we're going to do in short, to make a 5-minute explanation, a 10-second explanation, what we're going to do is we're going to take the difference in the sales assessments from the subject property, and we're going to use those as adjustments to the time adjusted sale price. And what this is going to do is it's going to narrow down the indicated market value of the range, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to account for the value impacting characteristics of each specific property. And of course, that goes back to the idea that superior properties are going to sell for more and inferior properties are going to sell for less, right? So we're trying to adjust each of these sales to the subject property such that the adjusted prices are going to give us an indicated range of what the subject property would sell for. So we show that if we flip again to, well, I'm actually going to show that on my paragraph 5.7, which is on page 12. But just before I get into that, let's stop on page 11 really quickly. That's my paragraph 5.6. Mr. Chairman, when I talk about the differences in the subject properties, I'll turn your attention to 5.6 here. This is essentially a summary of the 4 sales that were used. And you'll see the specific Bearland condominium complex in the middle of the page. And you'll see that they are, these 23 units, they are location-wise very, very close to each other. They're all within obviously the same residential condominium complex. But again, the units on the right side of the page, they back onto the Bow River. The units on the left side of the page, they back onto Three Sisters Drive. So you do have specific locational factors that affect these units, even though the improvements may be very similar. The sizes might differ a little bit, but ultimately, they're all built around the same age. They're all the same sort of house type, 2 stories with basement. They all have garages. Some have the lowest level developed. Some don't. But ultimately, they're similar, but they all are a little bit different. So specifically with respect to the exact location within the complex, and then ultimately with the specifics around whether some have that bottom level fully developed, and some are a little bit smaller, some are a little bit bigger. So what we're trying to do is adjust for these differences and lead the board to an indicated range of market value. So on my page 12, that's paragraph 5.7, you will see here that the chart there in 5.7, essentially what it is it's taking the difference from the subject's assessment at 923,000, and we're essentially we're taking the difference from the subject's assessments from the actual sale indicators assessments. So you'll see all of the sales, the 4 sales there, and the difference in the specific assessments of these units, we are going to be using that as an adjustment amount, which we will apply to the time adjusted sale prices in 5.8. So that chart there on 5.7 ultimately just shows the difference between the subject's assessment and the sales indicators assessments. So what we're going to do for unit 2 is we're going to apply the adjustment of minus 133,000 to the time adjusted sale price of 1.144 to give us a final adjusted sale price, which essentially would represent the subject's specific characteristics. It's essentially as if these 4 sales were the subject's exact characteristics, and they all sold on July 1st of 2019. That's essentially what you're looking at on paragraph 5.8. So towards the bottom of the page, after we make the adjustments to each of these 4 indicators, it leads us to essentially a range of indicated value for the subject property. And so you'll see that the indicated value range is roughly 841,000 to about $1,082,000, with a respective median of 1,040,000 and an average of 1,001,000. When you compare that indicated market value range to the subject properties assessment at 923, this is what I would believe demonstrates reasonableness. After we've gone through, we've adjusted all of the sales indicators for time. We've adjusted all of the sales indicators for the specific differences, value impacting differences from the subject property. This leads us to an indicated range, which essentially shows or demonstrates to the board that through the median or the average of this indicated range is within a reasonable range of the subject's assessment at 923. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I believe that the assessment is fair and equitably assessed. In my opinion, I think a more reasonable value for the subject property, as indicated through the sales indicators and the analysis that we just went through, is more reasonable at a range of 923 than it would be at 782,000. And when you take a look at the complainant's disclosure, certainly, I feel that there was enough there to go through the merit process. But ultimately, if we were being a little bit critical, the complainant never really led the board to why he believed or how he got to a 782,000. So when you look at the 2 disclosures, you have the complainant's disclosure who's asking for 782, but really failed to demonstrate why 782,000 is more reasonable than 923,000. There was no concrete analysis that could really lead or demonstrate the board down the path to 782,000. If it's a question of whether 923,000 is more reasonable than 782,000, in my opinion, the analysis and all of the evidence that we had just gone through would demonstrate that the weight that should be awarded to that analysis and conclusion, in my opinion, should be stronger than the complainant's. And with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for your time. I respectfully ask the board to confirm the assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Wayloggy. Questions from the board, Ms. Mara? Oh, you're muted.
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hildebrand?
A couple questions, Lance. On 5.5, your table there, the ASR values, would you agree that, to draw any meaningful conclusions, it means that the original assessments or the assessments, in fact, are market in the first place? right? So if all the assessments are off, then this analysis would also be off, if I can use that word.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. If these indicated ASRs were 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, then the rest of the analysis would fall apart. So yeah, you're very correct on that thought.
But if all of
and
those
that-
assessments are out by 20%, you could still make the conclusion that you've come to something close to your median or average. But it doesn't mean that the assessments are correct. It just means they're consistent.
That's right. That's right. Ultimately, if the assessments don't show that they are accurate and good estimates of value, then ultimately we couldn't rely on the adjustments thereafter. So that's exactly what I was trying to show, is that the assessment model is a very good estimate of value for this complex, such that we could rely on the differences in those assessments as adjustments to the sale prices.
And under 5.6, you were kind enough there to show the plot plan for the complex. And I think one of the key points that the complainant was making was the difference in value between those that back onto the green space and those that back onto the road. And when I look at the assessed values for the complex, it appears that there's probably a 20% difference in assessed value between those on the road and those on the green space. And have you given any thought to whether that 20% sort of differential is appropriate given market sales numbers?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. Yeah, essentially, when you look at the four indicators, you have two. It's kind of nice. You have two of the sales that are essentially backing onto the bow or within a very close and visual range of the Bow River, and then you have two of the units that have sold that are closer to the busy road. Are not on the favorable location backing onto the river. So what is kind of nice is that you kind of have half and half of the indicators. And if you kind of scroll, so if we keep comparable number 1 and comparable number 4 in our minds, so those are the ones that are not backing on the river. And so comparable number 1 and comparable number 4, comparable number 1 has an assessment to sale ratio of 0.92, comparable number 4 at 1.1. So if you're looking at, even though it's only a few indicators, if you're looking at a median or an average of those, that's going to fall in right around that 1.01, 1.02. It's going to be very close to essentially market value. So when you take a look at the ones that are on the Bow River, both of them would indicate 0.89. So that might suggest that maybe the ones on backing on the bow could come up, but certainly the ones that are not backing onto the bow would be very close to market value.
Right. Thank you for your response.
More questions, Mr. Hildebrand?
No, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Wayloggy, I have a couple. First of all, on page 11 of your submission, your evidence exhibit R1, I note the second table below the plan. You have the subject property, you have comparable number 3, and comparable number 4. And comparable number 4 would appear to be the subject property. Is that an error of reporting, or?
No, that's not an error. The subject property did sell within the 3-year analysis period. So that would be comparable number 4. Yeah. And so that's essentially why, or one of the reasons I suspect, and through our discussions, is that his sale was one of the 4 that was used as subject property. It did result in an assessment to sale ratio of 1.1. So it is the indicator that is where the time adjusted sale price would be below. So you see overall, there's one of the indicators that's below the assessment, and then the other 3 are going to be above the assessment. But for him, I think that was one of the concerns that he had raised when you're looking at the time adjusted sale price of his specific unit, it would fall below his assessed value. And in response to that, when the assessor builds an assessment model, it is intended that you're building a model such that the results of that model would produce ratios where half of the sales indicators would be above the assessment and half of the sales indicators would be below. Because of course we're looking to be within the middle of the sales range. So it's not uncommon when you look at a stratification of property to have sales indicators, and it's going to be roughly about half the sales indicators to be above and half to be below.
Okay, thank you. The second question is with respect to a comment, a statement made in the complainant's information, Exhibit C2, the disclosure of evidence from the complainant. And I'm looking at his bullet number 4. Compared to the sale price, the total assessment of the other 3 properties all went down. He lists the 3, whereas my property went up 27%. Throughout the email and telephone communication, the assessor wasn't able to give me an explanation for this. Now, I believe I heard you say earlier on that information was incorrect, that they all went up. I just wanted to hear that again and know that you tried to explain it to him and were unsuccessful, or if you can fill us in on that.
Yeah. So to confirm, I won't use the word up because, of course, assessments aren't prepared based on previous. But what I will say is that all of the current assessments for the 23 units are higher than the assessments last year. So you're not looking at a scenario where his assessment went up, his assessment is much higher than last year, where other folks in the complex have assessments that are well below last year's. You're not looking at a scenario like that. Overall, the assessments for the 2020 tax year for all of the units are higher than the assessments from last year. What he's referencing in that point is what we had just recently talked about, is that when he looks at the time adjusted sale price and he sees 841, he's saying, well, why is my time adjusted sale price lower than my assessment when you look at the other 3 indicators and those time adjusted sale prices are higher than their assessment? And the reason for that is going back to the same response in the previous question, is that, well, the assessor tries to build an assessment model such that it's in the middle of that range, so that when we test the assessment model against the time adjusted sale prices, you're going to get half of the indicators, roughly half the indicators above and roughly half of the indicators below. Now with 4 sales, somebody might say, well, wouldn't that mean you'd have 2 above and 2 below? Why is it 1 and 3? Ultimately, what that just means is that the assessment model is a little bit on the low side. If you take a look at the median and average assessment to sales ratio of the 4 indicators, 0.91 and 0.95 respectively. So when we test the assessment model, even though it is a good estimate of market value, it would indicate that the assessments are still a little bit on the low side. And that's why you see a slightly uneven distribution after testing, where you'd have 1 of the indicators below the assessment and then 3 indicators above. If hypothetically if you had an assessment model that would be right in the middle and you had 4 indicators, usually you'd have 2 and 2.
Okay.
So and that can be a challenging. It can be a challenging idea or concept to get your mind around, and assessments not always the easiest thing to. It takes a little time and to understand some of these concepts. So I think there was maybe because I did try to explain everything that I've explained here today, but sometimes up, down, below, above. Sometimes it might not sink in exactly how I've explained it.
Okay, thank you. The next question I have is the next bullet down that he had in the complaints disclosure evidence, Exhibit C2. According to my records, the camera real estate went up 10.8% in 2017, down 1.1% in 2018, and down a further 1.6 in 2019. Your graph on page 7 of 70 of your submission shows the residential condos on an upward arc ever since July 2016. So we don't have the complainant present to tell us what he meant by camera real estate. Presumably that would be real estate as a whole in the town versus condominiums separately, which is what you've done.
Yeah, it could be a number of things too. It could mean the annual year of 2017. So is someone looking from January 1st, 2017? Because of course our analysis starts from July 1st, 2017. So it could be a difference of time. One of the critiques that I have with real estate boards, presenting these numbers, oftentimes they're just far too general. So what the most common thing that they would look at is the average sale price per month. And as we know, Mr. Chairman, you could have a month where a lot of superior inventory sells, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, that would inflate that average sale price that month. And then the next month you could have a lot of the lower inventory sell, and all of a sudden the average sale price is 500, 700,000 a month. So what you essentially get is if you look at average sale prices over an indicated period, it tends to look like a heart monitor. And a lot of times that's not how the market reacts. The market moves in ebbs and flows. It goes up and it goes down, but it doesn't react like this. It has more of a consistent flow to it, which you'll see in our presentation. The reason why the assessor uses the sale to assessment ratio and why the assessor is audited on that particular technique is because it is one of the techniques used that will properly isolate time as a variable in the analysis. So it's not affected by location and physical characteristics. Why isn't it affected by that? Because when you use the ratio of a sale price to an assessment, if you think about the sale price of a superior house, it includes the specific location and physical characteristics of that particular property. So if a house sells at $3 million, it's because it has superior characteristics. Well, if you take a look at the assessment of that house, it also takes into account all of those location and physical characteristics, such that the assessment is within a reasonable range of that sale price. So when you use the ratio specifically and you trend that ratio over time, what you're properly doing, in short, is you're extracting time's effect on value and analyzing what that changes over that resulting period. So oftentimes we do get a lot of ratepayers, a lot of real estate agents, a lot of people that are in the business, and I don't want to critique them too much. I'm just saying that there is, be cautious when you see real estate agents say the market's gone up or it's gone down, because oftentimes they may be referencing just an average sale price, which is not properly extracting time as a factor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No more questions of Mr. Wailogi? No? Okay, thank you very much. I think we reached the conclusion of our hearing. I'd ask now, and the complainant is not present, but Mr. Wailogi, if you feel you've been heard today and received a fair hearing?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your time and your consideration in this matter. Thank you.
Mr. Body not being present, the complainant not being present, all we can assure him is that we received his evidence and have given it full consideration. If there's nothing further, I will declare the hearing closed. No further evidence or submissions may be received by the board after this point. Municipal Government Act requires a written decision within 30 days and gives the clerk an additional 7 days to issue the decision. We will make every effort to meet or beat those requirements, and the clerk will forward our decision to you at our earliest opportunity. And with that, the board members will go into deliberation in camera. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lance.